Hello, everyone. This is Sean from the Soccer Nostalgia blog. I have the pleasure to interview Spanish author and historian Mr. Sergio Vilariño Ferreiro as we discuss Real Madrid's UEFA Cup adventure in the 1984-85 season. Mr. Ferreiro has appeared on the podcast in the past discussing the history of Spanish football. Mr. Villarino Ferreiro is the author of México 50 años de fútbol en color. This interview is separate from a podcast series. This video interview will serve as a companion piece to a written blog presentation on Real Madrid's UEFA Cup win in 1984-85 season. Hello, Sergio. Welcome.
Hello, Sahan. Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's go back in time. As the 1984-85 season kicked off, what was the state of the affairs at Real Madrid and their objective in the UEFA Cup that season?
Expectations at the club are always the same, to win, especially in the league. And it was a very long period without a title, the longest since the arrival of Alfredo Di Stefano in 1953. And so there was anxiety in the club. The last four leagues were won by the Basque teams, two by Real Sociedad, two by Athletic Bilbao. The economic situation of the club was not good either, so there was a lot of pressure on the shoulders of President Luis de Carlos. Elections were supposed to come at the end of the season, and during the whole year, there was friction on the board of directors. Ramon Mendoza, who was a businessman known for his commercial links with the Soviet Union, was placing himself as de Carlos' successor.
We have to mention that Real Madrid in Europe, they had not won since 1966. So we're talking almost 2 decades, 18, 19
Yeah,
years.
that's a lot of time for Real Madrid.
Indeed, yeah. Can you describe the new manager, the former Real Madrid great Amancio?
Amancio was a club legend. He has served as a link between Di Stefano's team and the Ye team that won that sixth European Cup in 1966 that you were talking about. Throughout his more than, I think, 15-year career at Real Madrid, he had been the club's great reference. He was always the main piece in all those teams. He started as a dazzling winger and later played as a second striker or on a more central attacking role. He was obviously considered one of the best players in the world at the time. And when he retired, he began working at the club, and until the previous year, he was coaching Castilla, Real Madrid's second team. The feeling among the fans was one of excitement because of the new crop of players from the academy and because of Amancio himself. The press urged the club to promote him and his ducklings. The year before, there was a famous article by the respected journalist Julio César Iglesias, where he gave them their battle name, La Quinta del Buitre, right? Referring to them as a group, and also citing that fifth gear that the Buitre appeared to have. And he urged Di Stefano to give them a chance. So there was a lot of expectation around this group.
Can you describe the transfer activity in the off-season as well as the emergence of the La Quinta del Buitre generation that you mentioned?
As an overall view, we can say that Argentinian forward Jorge Valdano arrived from Real Zaragoza as the main recruit. Johnny Medgod, the Dutchman, left to join Nottingham Forest. Vicente del Bosque retired. And English winger Laurie Cunningham left to join Olympique Marseille in France. The fans knew about the tight financial situation, but that never keeps them from asking for transfers. The three main figures who left were past their best in the case of Del Bosque and Cunningham, or never captured the imagination of the crowd in the case of Medgod. Valdano was a good player, but I don't think anybody could have imagined the great seasons he was going to play at the club. The feeling among the fans was that of excitement because of the new crop of players from the academy and Amancio, as I said before. La Quinta del Buitre had captured the fans' imagination during their excellent campaign the previous year, in which they had won the second division title, which is something that no other academy team has done in Spain. And all except for Mitchell had already made their debut with the first team, and Butragueño had even been called up for the European Championship in France that same summer.
We discussed La Quinta del Buitre in a previous podcast, but just to remind everyone, these 5 players include Emilio Butragueño, nicknamed El Buitre, along with Michel that you mentioned, Rafael Martin Vázquez, Manuel Sanchez, and Miguel Pardeza. Let's look at the backbone of the Real Madrid squad at this point.
I think the team was in a constant state of transition during this period. Although at Real Madrid, that does not prevent the demands from being at the highest level. But it was a squad composed of veteran Spanish football figures such as Juanito, Santillana, Camacho, the goalkeepers, Miguel Ángel and García Remón, along with some good players from the Castilla team that reached the Copa del Rey final in 1980, like Gallego and Agustín. There were also players of good quality who had not reached their full potential, such as Bonet or Juan Lozano, who had been the star signing the previous year. And of course, there was Uli Stilicke, the soul of the midfield, and Jorge Valdano himself as foreign players. And in addition to these obviously important elements, all the members of La Quinta del Buitre were now permanently promoted. And the rest of the squad, let's face it, were basically mediocre Spanish players.
Let's look at this UEFA Cup adventure. In the first round, they face Austrian side Wacker Innsbruck. The first leg on September 19th at Bernabeu is very comfortable win for Real Madrid, 5-0. 2 weeks later, on October 3rd at Innsbruck, Real Madrid loses 2-0, but that already qualified, and there was never really any trouble for Real Madrid.
Yeah, but already we are seeing the signs that are going to mark this year in Europe. Like Madrid is really strong at home, but when they go away, they are just not good enough.
Yeah, I mean, even against the weakest sides, it seems
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
Next round, Real Madrid faces Yugoslavian side Rijeka. Now, this is a little bit tougher test. On October 24th at Rijeka, Real Madrid loses 3-1, and Isidro's late goal would be very important. On November 7th at home, as always, Real Madrid storms. But again, it was only in the last 23 minutes that Real Madrid overturns the deficit and wins 3-0. You're already seeing this is like not as important as the remontada in the next round, but you can already see that this is a pattern of this Real Madrid of this La Quinta del Buitre era.
Yeah. Rijeka, this tie with Rijeka became famous for a single reason, because they had a deaf mute player who was sent off for dissent. Although we know that there are a lot of ways to show dissent, but this situation was particularly hilarious. It was a really tough game, and I'm not sure if Madrid deserved to go through, to be honest. Rijeka, as you said, beat Madrid 3-1 at the Cantrida, and with 2 players who later played on in Spain at a good level, goalkeeper Mauro Ravnic and defender Nenad Grazan. But that front 3 with Butragueño, young Butragueño really, Pineda and Losada was a good proof of the level of that Madrid side. It was a good player, good young player, and 2 kind of average Spaniards, right? Not great. Fortunately, as we said before, the Los Blancos were able to win 3-0 at the Bernabeu in a very tense game where just they only broke the deadlock with a penalty by Juanito and 2 late goals from Santillana and Valdano, which is something that must sound really familiar to Madrid fans even nowadays, the current state of affairs by the club in Europe.
We come to the third round. In some ways, this would be the reference tie for Real Madrid as far as their European adventure in the subsequent seasons and the future. In this third round, they're facing Belgian side Anderlecht, who, let's remind everyone, were one of the best teams around at this point. They had won the UEFA Cup in 1983. They had reached the final the previous season. They had players like Frank Verkouteren, Erwin Vandenberg, a teenage Enzo Schifo, Danish internationals like Frank Arneson, Morten Olsen, among others. A very strong side. In the first leg at Brussels on November 28, 1984, Anderlecht defeated Real Madrid 3-0. At this point, I don't think many could have foreseen any other result as far as this round.
Yeah, as you said, the Belgians were one of the best teams of the continent at the time. They had a team full of internationals, not only Belgians, Danes, as you said, also Yugoslavs like Luka Perusovic, and of course one of the new gems of European football in Enzo Schifo, a player who rivaled Butragueño, right? As one of the new young guns of the continent. They were really good. They played an extremely dynamic, expansive football, and in the first leg at Park Astrid, they were a steamroller. 3-0 goals with Vandenberg, Jernatinsky, and Verkouteren. The first two of them came in just a couple of minutes, after which Madrid collapsed, as often happened whenever they played in Northern Europe. This was like a pattern for the club in the last maybe 12 years. Fortunately, the second leg was going to be different, and as soon as they arrived in the dressing room in Brussels, the veterans, especially Camacho and Juanito, began preparing for the match at the Bernabeu, assuring that they were going to destroy Anderlecht and challenging the youngsters of La Quinta to show all their worth in Europe.
This match would be on December 7th at Bernabeu. In some way, this would be the match that would introduce Emilio Butragueño to a European audience. He would score a hat-trick as Real Madrid stormed to a 6-1 win and eliminate one of the best teams from Europe. Essentially, this was the first remontada of this generation. So Manuel Sanchez would score early in the 3rd minute. Butragueño would score a hat-trick. So he scored first in the 16th minute. And then Valdano scored in the 29th minute. Anderlecht pulled a goal back in the 34th minute. But then quickly before halftime, Valdano scores another goal. Early in the second half, Butragueño scores twice for his hat-trick. Real Madrid inflicted a 6-1 loss to, again, one of the best sides in Europe at this point. Real Madrid were through to the quarterfinals against many people's predictions. Let's not forget, as this is happening, Real Madrid is also struggling domestically, so no one expected this result.
No, nobody, but they are setting already a pattern for all these games and European ties that we are going to see in the next couple of years at least. In all the famous remontadas, the young players blended perfectly with the veterans like Camacho, Santillana, Juanito, and their style of play was loved by the Bernabeu because they went 100% into attacking mode. And the Bernabeu, on full capacity, around 120,000 people, became a very difficult place to play. Obviously, the game against Anderlecht is special because it is the match when Europe discovered El Buitre. He was already known in Spain, but Europe didn't know him. He scored 3 goals. He assisted on another 2 for Valdano, and this was a tremendous result against a very powerful team. It proved that maybe this generation was special and could win big trophies because there was a sad atmosphere in the club before that year, especially after the defeat against Aberdeen in the Cup Winners' Cup final in 1983. It was an injection of optimism for everybody. And it was an injection of optimism for everybody, just in contrast of what was going on in La Liga.
I don't know if the term remontada existed at this point or not, but certainly this is the reference match in terms of these seemingly impossible comebacks, especially with this La Quinta del Buitre generation. I guess I imagine it was not self-evident at this point that this would be a pattern, but nevertheless, it must have been a big surprise for observers.
Yeah, the thing is that obviously the word remontada existed in Spanish, but it was not coined, if you want to refer to a sporting result, right? And when we talk about remontada now in Spanish, we are almost referring exclusively to Real Madrid when we talk about that. Even Barcelona kind of took the word, obviously used the Catalan word remontada, but they use it also, right? When they were talking about their comeback against PSG, for example, some years ago. Once again, La Quinta del Buitre created like a new wave or a new trend in Spanish football. Although I always say, I don't think they were the key man in all these games. I think the veterans were more important in terms of the team spirit, really. Obviously, the youngsters were really good and they did a lot of good things on the field. But the veterans were the ones who kind of made them believe that they could win.
Let's go back to Emilio Butragueña, who's starting to get a lot of buzz. I remember this season, I was living in France. That's when I noticed that the football press, the French football press, were taking notice of him. There would be some profiles on him in magazines. He was already being touted as one of the best young players, young footballers in Europe. Needless to say, these European performances certainly helped that impression.
Everybody loves when a young player breaks into stardom, especially when he performs really well in the biggest games. And Butragueño had established himself domestically the previous season, and this was the year Europe got to know him. At the end of 1985, he won the Bravo Trophy, awarded to the best European player under 21 years old, I think, which was a very prestigious accolade at the time. It wasn't just his goals, it was his presence, the way he moved, his interpretation of the game and the spaces. Butragueño was an atypical and very special player. He was not very fast, but he was skilled and was able to turn very quickly. And his main asset, I would say, was that he was very calm in the area. He was able to stop in the middle of the box, drop a shoulder, make a feint, and he would leave his marker for dead. And he had very good vision of the field too. So he was excellent when combining with other attacking players, as we'll see with Valdano and later on with Hugo Sanchez. And on top of that, there was his personality. He was very polite, he was very shy, and he became a sort of ideal son-in-law for everybody in Spain.
We already mentioned this. At this point, Real Madrid is struggling domestically at home and, in fact, would have a disastrous season by their standards. Can you discuss this contrast at home versus abroad?
Sure. Of course, the season started in the worst possible way with a 0-3 home loss versus Barcelona. That definitely showed a golfing class and experience mainly between both teams. Barcelona had an experienced squad full of internationals and with some world-class players in it. Madrid was rebuilding. Barcelona played a British type of football with high press and high pace because I think it was the first season under Terry Venables. Madrid was still looking for their style, very influenced by a crop of players who live by the laws of La Furia, right? Camacho, Santillana, Juanito. The atmosphere at the club was not ideal. As I said before, the board of directors was looking forward to the elections. The squad had internal issues with Amancio, unable to have a strong grip over some veterans. There were even scandals that involved the innocent members of La Quinta, such as when Amancio discovered a group of women in the room of two veterans, Juanito and Lozano in Milan, during the trip to play Inter, that we will talk about later. Butragueño, although he was not involved, he was there because it was his room. So in the end, when they changed the coach towards the end of the season, the situation was tough, but Maloney was a very experienced coach and very used to this situation. He was the man who really gave La Quinta their chance and focused on the European campaign that brought really important moments for the team, because basically the domestic campaign was a disaster.
So we come to the spring of 1985 and the quarterfinals round. Was a victory in Europe a declared objective at this point?
Yes, it was mainly because the team imploded in the league. They were even bypassed by Atletico, and that was basically it. On those days, if you could win the league and qualify for the European Cup, it was great. But the difference between being second and being fourth was not big. There was no fourth position trophy like nowadays. Real Madrid won only 4 games from December 16th till the end of the season. Those are astonishing numbers for such a club. So the UEFA Cup became the main goal for the club once the final third of the season arrived. Tottenham were the reigning champions of the competition, very strong team at the time when English football was club football in this case. It was experienced an excellent period with English teams dominated the European scene. It was an extremely close and tough tie. In London, Steve Perryman was the decisive man of the match. His own goal in the 15th minute was the only one in 180 minutes of tense football. Stilicke in midfield, and his presence was very important to keep the brilliant playmaking of Glenn Hoddle at bay. The German didn't play in the second leg, and at the Bernabeu, Madrid couldn't overcome a Tottenham side that played the last 12, 15 minutes one man down due to the expulsion of the unfortunate Perryman. Mancio included Sanchez, Michel, and Butragueño, and also Chendo, who is going to be one of the most notable supporting players for La Quinta. Real was not brilliant in this tie, but they were solid enough to go through the semis.
And these matches are March 6th at White Hart Lane that Real Madrid won with an own goal. It was Butragueño's cross from the right side that Perryman deflected into his own net. And the second leg at Bernabeu, it was a scoreless tie. So for a change, Real Madrid won away from home and did not win at home.
Yeah, I think it's the only time that it happened.
Yeah. So now we come to the pivotal semifinals against Internazionale Milano, the Italian side that included the likes of the West German Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, the Irishman Liam Brady, and Italian internationals like Alessandro Altobelli, among others, a young Walter Zenga in goal, Giuseppe Bergomi. So a very strong side. Real Madrid had already eliminated Inter in the 1981 Champions Cup, again in the semifinals, and in the quarterfinals of the 1983 Cup Winners' Cup. Just because of this fact, were the matches against Inter seen as advantageous, or was there caution given their league form?
No, Inter was seen as a very tough opponent. It's true that Madrid have always seemed to get the best out of them, but it was a difficult draw, especially knowing that Salinica, Sarajevo, and Videoton were the other teams left in the competition. Inter were fighting for the league too, just 3 points behind Hellas Verona, so their domestic form was much better than Madrid's. Once again, Madrid lost the first game away from the Bernabeu. It was the day when Juanito was caught with the señoritas, episode that we already talked about. And surprisingly, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Amancio was sacked and replaced by Maimolovny. I say surprisingly because the season, as we've been talking for the last minutes, was pretty bad in the league, so a change was needed. Inter arrived to the semifinals after defeating a very strong Cologne side, and they had a very good team, as you said. Strong defense commanded by Zenga, Bergomi, and Ferri, and although him and Colavati were absent from this first leg, alongside Bini, who was one of the hard men of the team, and the attacking trio of Brady, Rummenigge, and Altobelli. They had a little bit of everything, right? The inventive passing game of the Irishman, the all-around capacity of the German, and the presence in the box of Spillo, the Italian striker, who was by far the one who caused most problems to the Spanish defense. Madrid played this game without Stilicke, and the pair of Gallego and Lozano were in trouble against their Italian counterparts. Martin Vázquez played a bad game, not really helping the team to link up defense and attack. So Madrid was a little bit toothless in attack, and the result was 2-0 for the Interisti, and Madrid had once again they needed to attempt the remontada at the Bernabeu.
This had been on April 10th at San Siro. Liam Brady had given Inter the lead with a penalty kick in the 25th minute, and Altobelli scored the second in the 57th minute.
Yeah.
Now, as you mentioned, even though this is like near the tail end of the season, this was just too much for the Real Madrid hierarchy, and Amancio was sacked with Luis Moloni replacing him for the rest of the season. Now we come to the second leg on April 24th at Bernabeu. This is another remontada. Real Madrid pulls off a 3-0 win with Santiana scoring twice and Michel scoring the third. How is this particular remontada viewed historically against such a top side?
Well, in the second leg, the team broke the revenue record for a game at the Bernabeu at that moment. It was like 110 million pesetas, which is around $1 million at the time. The year before, after defeating Milan, Juanito told the Inter players his famous 90 minuti en el Bernabeu son molto longos, which is something like 90 minutes at the Bernabeu are very long, in a terrible attempt of Italian. His prophecy was correct back then, and once again, it was correct this year too. Inter had a very long night in Madrid, right? Bergomi was struck with an object thrown from the stands and had to be substituted in the 38th minute. And just 4 minutes later, Santillana scored the 2-0. Mitchell completed the remontada in the 57th minute in a game played without Butragueño, who was absent because of some kidney problems. Actually, Inter appealed to UEFA just to replay the game because of the Bergomi incident, although it never came to fruition. This is just another one of the whole series of remontadas, although I think it's clearly behind the ones against Anderlecht and Borussia Mönchengladbach from the next season. Inter suffered quite a few remontadas in Madrid during the 80s, and this was not the last one. I think next year it happened again.
Yeah, at the same stage.
Yeah.
Let's look at the managerial change, the replacement of Amancio with Luis Moloni. How was this viewed at the time?
At the time, it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was seen as something necessary. Amancio was a club legend, an extremely beloved figure, but the role he was playing was proving to be too much for him, especially when it came to controlling the dressing room. Moloni had already proven on several occasions that this was his strength, so the change was almost logical. And the results prove it, right? He was keen on a technical, passionate type of football, and Real fans liked it. It seemed that they were already kind of planning for the next season, which is what happened. Moloni continued to be the team's coach in 85-86 because he was seen as the perfect man for the job, even when the first idea of the club was to sign a British coach, namely John Toshak and Howard Kendall names were thrown around in the press. They would have fitted well with the old crop of players, but the new status of La Quinta players made the team style not very suited for those coaches. So Moloni remained, and he was very successful also.
I imagine by the time of the final against the Hungarian side Videoton, many assumed Real Madrid would win, especially following this yet another remontada against Inter.
Yeah, when the draw paired Madrid and Inter, it was considered an early final, basically. Videoton was the surprise pack of the competition. They had eliminated Dukla Prague, Paris Saint-Germain, Partizan Belgrade, Manchester United, and Srebrenica. Their trajectory was impeccable, and they had several Hungarian internationals who were taking the Hungarian national team to the 1986 World Cup in Mexico. But I think there was respect, but also confidence, right? Once again, the second leg was going to be played at the Bernabeu, and that was as a good omen, just in case Madrid played their usual terrible game away. But this time it was not even necessary. In Hungary, the Madridistas beat the Hungarian 0-3 with Butragueño back in the lineup and joining a front three with Santillana and Valdano, which is quite a change from that front three with Losada at the beginning of the year, Losada and Pineda, right? Mitchell, Stilicke, and Gallego were the three midfielders. So Mitchell was playing as a mezzala for the first time, as it was going to become usual later in his career, especially with the national team. He started more centrally as a central creative midfielder and moved into the right flank every now and then. He played a great game, scoring the first goal. Santillana and Valdano sealed the deal. And I think this final kind of established Mitchell as a obviously automatic starter and a respected figure in Spain and an international player.
This first leg was on May 8th in Hungary. And like you said, Michel scores the first goal and has a hand in the next two goals by Santillana and Valdano near the end. So after the first leg, Real Madrid more or less has won the UEFA Cup. The second leg is at Bernabeu in 2 weeks' time at May 22nd. Real Madrid just go through the motions just to hold the game as is. And Videoton scores a late goal in the 86th minute, but by then the result was more or less determined, and Real Madrid were the winners. And they won this 1984-85 UEFA Cup to save a disastrous season. And astonishingly, like we mentioned in the beginning, this was Real Madrid's first European trophy since 1966.
The second leg was basically a celebration, really. I mean, Videoton won 0-1, but the final result was never in doubt. 120,000 Madridistas back in the Bernabeu to see the team lifting his first European trophy in 19 years, especially after 3 defeats, 2 in the European Cup Winners' Cup, 71 against Chelsea, 83 against Aberdeen, and 1 in the European Cup in 81 against Liverpool. So it was a good day to be in Madrid.
They used this bounce to also win the League Cup, which no longer exists in Spain. Real Madrid had not won in Europe in nearly 2 decades. How is this victory regarded by Real Madrid historians these days? Because in a way, it kickstarted Real Madrid's resurgence in Europe in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an important win. It was viewed as an European victory, something that was much missed in Madrid. It was also a good way to go into a summer marked by the presidential elections. Also a good way to say goodbye to Luis de Carlos, who was the man who commanded the club in the aftermath of Santiago Bernabeu's death. And after several years of not being able to compete for the league title, some major disappointments, for the first time in the whole decade, I think there was optimism in Concha Espina, right? The signings for the upcoming season were excellent, and the squad was going to have an immense depth.
What was known at this point about the incoming president, Ramon Mendoza, elected right towards the tail end of the season?
Well, Mendoza was a former member of the board of directors. He was a businessman in Spain, and he became famous. He made his money, his fortune, due to his links in terms of trading with the Soviet Union, which was obviously very restricted during the dictatorship of Franco. So when the democracy arrived to Spain, his business actually kind of boomed, right? And he was obviously the kind of the opposite of Luis de Carlos. He was very outspoken, a modern personality, if you want to call it like that. De Carlos was a very traditional man, very serious, right? Mendoza was kind of histrionic. He was one of those 80s, 90s presidents, right, that loved to be in front of the cameras. And he became president after his 2 rivals for the election, Eduardo Peña and Juanito Navarro, who was basically a comedian, withdrew from the race, and immediately set off to reinforce the team and use the basis of these UEFA Cup champions to create a strong squad, able to win the league and to go deep in the European Cup. Right, as we said before, he kept Molovny as the coach and was working to bring top players to the club, right? Hugo Sanchez arrived from Atletico via Pumas, Antonio Maceda from Sporting de Gijón, and Rafael Gordillo from Betis, who formed later on La Quinta de los Machos, right? As Hugo Sanchez liked to call themselves. And really the main task for Molovny was to get results while keeping the veterans happy. and the young members of La Quinta del Buitre growing, right? It was not easy since Juanito Camacho and Santillana were still important members of the squad, along with Gallego, for example. Sanchis, Butragueño, Michel were automatic starters, while Martin Vázquez was more of a rotation player. And on top of that, he had Valdano, who had the best season of his career, Maceda, Gordillo, Hugo Sanchez, the new signings, right? So the only weak spot was in goal, where Ocho Torena started as the main man, but it was not convincing enough. And we know that he was going to be replaced in the season after by Paco Bullo.
In closing, was this the season that kickstarted Real Madrid's European legacy, as well as truly established La Quinta del Buitre as a force?
Yes, this was indeed the campaign that established them. Firstly, as first team players, and then as important members of the team. They were seen as the perfect replacements for the veterans, and also as a cost-effective alternative since the club's finance were in a difficult situation. This way, Real Madrid's efforts, or financial efforts, could focus on buying good players to complement La Quinta without the need to purchase a new backbone for the team. And this marked the beginning of a decade defined by this generation, one of the most fondly remembered, for better or for worse, by Real Madrid fans.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. And I would urge everyone to please read the main blog article as well for more detail. The link is included in the video upload description, along with our respective contact information. So, Sergio, thank you once again, and hope to continue these discussions on Spanish football history.
Thank you, my friend. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.